into week 6 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defenses and DSTs I would drop this week. The first one's the New England Patriots. So the Patriots, they were a hot pickup, obviously, in their week 5 matchup at the Houston Texans, but they couldn't get anything going really in that ball game. 22 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery, and that was it. And now they got a tough matchup in week 6 versus the Dallas Cowboys that give up the third least amount of fantasy points to defenses. And we know this Cowboy offense, one of the better offenses in the league, and they're rushing for about 180 yards a game as well. So it's going to be a tough game for this New England DST, the Dallas Cowboys. And I know in week 7 they got a great matchup versus the New York Jets that give up the most fantasy points to defenses. But right here this week, after a struggling ball game at Houston, and the last 2 weeks before that, this Patriot defense doing nothing. In my opinion, they're an easy drop. Unless you want to stash them to versus the Jets, that's fine. But if you don't want to stash defenses and stream them each and every week, or whatever the case may be, they're dropped this week. The next defense I would drop this week, San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers, one of the better defenses coming into the season, drafted in fantasy football leagues. But they haven't shown up as well since week 2. Is this team. Week 3 versus Green Bay, 30 points allowed, a sack and a 4th down stop. Week 4 versus Seattle, 28 points allowed, 3 sacks. Week 5 at Arizona, 17 points allowed, which is pretty solid, but only 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. So now in week 6, they got a bye week here, San Francisco, and they already been dropped in 14% of fantasy leagues. And I think with the bye coming up and them struggling the last 3 weeks, they're an easy drop. But after week 6, I think they could be a decent ad once again after that versus Indianapolis and Chicago. Not the greatest of two offenses in week 7 and 8, but right now they're not going to hold much value. They haven't been doing much, and they're on bye as well. So for this week in week 6, they're dropping the third and final DST. I would drop this week's the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns, they got destroyed in that ball game in week 5, giving up 47 points to that Los Angeles Charger offense. They had 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. But this season, this Brown team on paper, they've looked good, but they're not really getting the job done besides a couple ball games. In week 3 versus Chicago, 6 points allowed, 9 sacks. And week 4 at Minnesota, only 7 points allowed, 2 sacks and an into and 2 4th down stops if you play that in your league. But now, week 5, they got torched at the Chargers. Week 6, they got Arizona coming up. And even week 7 versus the Denver Broncos, they've been a pretty decent offense as well so far this season. So the next 2 weeks here at least, this Cleveland Brown defense, they're not going to be usable in my opinion for fantasy football. And after that horrible performance in week 5 at the Chargers, they're droppable. So that's a few defenses I would drop here heading into week 6 of the fantasy football season.